Well, good morning, everyone. And good afternoon if you're watching in a different time zone. But it's good to have everybody here. We are going to be talking about the art of reaching out, what churches can do as far as reaching out to new folks. And the genesis for this presentation came from, it all started with an email, a newsletter article written by actually a Canadian evangelical last summer that I saw that had this statement that said, after COVID, we're never going back to church the same way. And basically said the church has left the building and we've got to really evolve and adjust. And it was a really brilliant piece. So I circulated to Jane, she circulated to the Council of Ministers, and Shoutout, who cannot be with us this morning because she's got a sore throat and she's just being extra cautious, but she's tested negative. So we'll miss her in our presentation, said maybe we should take the course. And the course, we thought about it and we talked to the denomination about it, and we thought, well, it's going to really have a different bent to it because it's going to be more on the evangelical side of things. But as we talked about it, we could learn something. And what we decided to do was see what ministers or licensed pastors were interested in learning from this course, but then agreeing to be in a group that shared the results from a Swedenborgian perspective. So we would gather. So you're looking at our fearless team. Of course, we're missing Shada this morning, but she's with us in spirit and maybe online. And there's our team that met for a number of weeks. And beyond just the team that reviewed the course, it became a nice, I would say for me personally, a lovely support group during the pandemic too, that we bonded as friends, obviously. So that was another sweet part of it, and maybe one of the underlying messages. So what we did was we took the classes and we said, okay, that's what they're teaching. How would this reflect in our teachings and our communities? And it was really, really good. Some of the stuff I'll just say we would just kind of giggle on the call and say, like, that relates to nothing that we do in our faith. And then a lot of it was just very practical and very good. So that's what we'll be sharing today. Each of us will be sharing the insight that we got the most for a few minutes. And I also have a clip of our congregation that became a product of the class that I can share. But I think I'll share that at the very end after we've all shared, so everybody, we have plenty of time. So with that, any questions before I get started? Does that sound about right, about what we did? Okay, I'm not making things up. Okay, so it was this was my perspective. Here's our team, and so the lessons learned from our course, The Art of Reaching, was that first they did a whole course on why people are not coming to church today. And I thought it was this is one of their insights I found very interesting, that people are more self-directed in their spirituality. In other words, I don't need a community to do this. I can do it on my own. I can go to YouTube, and I can find my own path. I really don't need a place where I go once a week to get that information. So it does not mean necessarily that people are less spiritual or less spiritually seeking. It means that they're looking for something else. The other thing that they suggested was a lack of duty or guilt. For a long time, people went to church because that's what you did. And it wasn't a question of whether you did or didn't. You went somewhere. And so that was, I thought, a really good insight. And then the third was he talked about mobility. This generation is always mobile. People are constantly traveling. They've got sports activities. They're on vacations at various places. So the mobile culture had an impact. And then finally, he said online. People are finding their spirituality online. They don't need to go to a space. So I thought that was those were some really interesting insights from the course. From a Swedenborgian perspective, I took away from that one that we are unique in our teachings, and it's a complicated teaching, is that the old church is going to die away. And I don't think we've completely embraced that, because in many ways we've imitated old church, and I think we need to upgrade our game to be ready for new church. And I use the phrase, we're the last one in, first one out. We imitated old church after our, the predictions of a mystic was that the Christian church would pass, and we imitated that. So we have to reinvent what it is church. And so that was the Swedenborg insight from that. Another really interesting insight that I had from the course was that he said that you need to embrace infrequent attenders. And this is something that we all in our group discovered, that you'll have somebody who will come, they'll say, we love it, this is my community. You won't see them for many months, maybe a year. You run into them at the grocery store or somewhere, and they say, and you kind of want to ask as a pastor, like, what did I do wrong? Or, what happened? You were coming. And what the person will tell you is, I'm still part of the church. They don't feel like they've left. They're still part of it. They just haven't been there in 6 months. To make that a shameful thing or, to criticize them is not going to work. So just be aware that's how people are thinking. It's a different way of thinking about group. One other solution that they talked about was equipping people not so much to attend church, but to be church. That really resonates with our theology, that you're really not, it's not about buildings. We got really wrapped up in buildings and the structures. It really is, you are the church and your spiritual life, and we're a community that brings that together. And then he also said something to flip, use the building to get people online. That's interesting. Equip them to gather. But if you think that online was just going to be a pandemic thing, you're wrong. So, practical suggestions that were offered was strongly suggested, and I'm going to share what we did every week was say, hey, this is what I've learned, and here's how we're applying it. So I'm going to just share some examples of what we did at the DC church. But he says, allow others to help. Many ministers particularly have a very hard time not being in control, letting go, thinking it won't work. At Church of the Holy City, we started a summer preaching series that we've never done. We've usually had the summers off, where all members of the church are taking it every week. And that's turned out to be a really, really cool thing. Each person, you're really learning their spirituality and their view, and that's great. The church is not the building, he kept mentioning, so focus on the mission. And so in our community, we're exploring space that aligns to our mission instead of making the building our mission. Create a space for the unchurched was a suggestion. And in this was a great lesson for us. In our liturgy, our worship service, we say, okay, now we're going to do the invocation. Invocation means invoking God's presence. Now we're going to do the confession. Confession means that we've sinned. And sometimes I make it even as a joke. And if you haven't, come talk to me, because you should be leading this. So we are going to confess our sins. Now we're going to look for the readings. These readings are taken from the scripture. And I will just say, in my experience, people have said to me things like, last week you said you preached from the gospel, but you said it was Mark. This week you're preaching from something called the gospel, but you said it was John. Which one's the gospel? Or you said last week, you said Old Testament, New Testament, but you've never explained why is one old, what makes one new as a testament. You preached in your sermon that Jesus healed a Roman centurion, but you never told us how Jesus got to Rome. And was Jesus preaching in Rome? So this is the kind of questions, and you just have to be ready for a world. A lot of the people in our group are completely unchurched, a generation or so. So you can't make assumptions, and you have to explain to people why we're doing what we're doing. And then when they say, this doesn't make sense, pay attention to that. So I think I really like that part. He also had a great line. He said, speak to the community that you want to have, not necessarily to the one you have. I think this is really important for our denomination. We're often preaching to the older generation that will soon transition to the spiritual world, to be blunt. And what we're missing is we're not bringing in a pipeline of new people and speaking to their language. And that's very difficult for ministers very often because their salaries are paid by the board. The board is generally the older crowd who wants things their way sometimes. So boards and churches really need to give that flexibility to speak, and it might be uncomfortable at first, to the congregation that doesn't exist yet, and they will show up. We created a skeptic series where you could ask a question on any topic that ministers don't preach about. And we even created a project where all the sermons were topics requested by the members. And then they said have a youth focus. We don't have that, so we're actually looking at creating a podcast where we have young people can interview the pastor, and we may even get a rabbi and a Muslim leader to answer spiritual questions. So very practical suggestions that we've implemented based on this. The question that I found most interesting from my perspective was this question: what is urgent that you're providing in your faith community? In the case of the course, the most urgent thing that they were offering was, we are saving you from hell. Okay? This is an urgent thing. If you don't come to church, you will go to hell, because if you don't accept Jesus Christ, you're doomed. That is not our theology, but it does create an urgency, and it does create a missionary atmosphere. So what is urgent in our church? And it really, we talked quite a bit about this and focused. I'll just share what we've learned in our thing is, one, community. People are looking for community. That's urgent. People are looking for authenticity. That's urgent. People are looking for inclusion. And that our tradition says all faith paths are good. If we are not getting that message out there, we're really missing the mark as far as I'm concerned. Because we're not going to compete with people who say you're doomed. We're the flip side of that coin. Embrace diversity. You've been hearing a lot about that here at our convention. But also it's beyond just race or sexual orientation. It's also ideological diversity. Letting people know it's okay that we don't speak the same way. A couple times, even at the convention, Annabelle, our church president, has questioned something that I have said, and people have said, wow, like to Annabelle, wow, you're allowed to question. And that's sad that is our culture right now, that people are afraid to even question their pastor. So you have to create a culture where that's available. Practicing freedom, that we all make our own path, that's our tradition. I've talked in my other mini course, but about peacemaking skills. Loving people without an agenda. That's really hard for churches. You look at people and you're like, oh my gosh, I want to get them on the building committee. I want to get them on the board. Don't make it your agenda. Let it be their agenda and ease them in to what they want to do. It's their spiritual path, not yours. And then you can offer trainings and partner with other groups. Very often in our tradition, we're so small, we say we couldn't get any numbers to our events. Partner with somebody else in the community who has numbers and bring them, and we've done that repeatedly. And then finally, teach people in their language. Particularly for our tradition, a lot of our language is very exclusive, and it does not make sense to people. So I even translate Swedenborg. When we do the Swedenborg reading every week, I literally I rewrite it so that someone who never read Swedenborg would understand what it is. Because he wrote in Latin, it's been translated, but it's awesome, very convoluted for a new listener. So those are some of the lessons that we learned at Church of the Holy City. I have a video of examples, but I'd like to have my other co-presenters share, and then I can share that at the end if we have time. I will say in summary, the thing that I took away was that, so what is the urgent thing that we can offer? Helping people develop spiritual resilience and to find their spiritual path. That's what we can do uniquely, and I think that is very attractive to the rising generation. So that'll be my comments, and I'm going to turn to my team and partners who are involved with this, and they'll each share theirs. If we have time, I'll show a video clip that will give you some examples of comments from our members who are extremely diverse in their theological outlook, and they're all coming to the same community. So that's a very cool thing. So thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I'm Paul Deming. I'm from the Garden Chapel, the Church of the Open Word in St. Louis, Missouri. Judy Ogle, one of our former board members, passed away a few weeks ago. But I'll always remember when she was leaving the board, she turned to me and she said, "Whatever you do, don't change the order of the service." And I did not respond, but I thought to myself, how can I ever agree to that? How could I ever agree that whatever we do, we won't change the order of the service? So I was intrigued about this course. There was an article in the Washington Post this past October, and this evangelical minister is actually a gathering in South Bend, Indiana, that was intended for about 25 pastors, and it was called the post-evangelical era. And over 100 pastors showed up. And it was interesting because they were all feeling disenfranchised and displaced by the evangelical movement that they had felt was co-opted by the political divide. So if you'll indulge me, here's a brief excerpt because I think this is so revealing for us, and it's encouraging to me for a number of reasons. So, as the pastors traded stories, they quickly found shared experiences. They lamented their conservative evangelical parents who watched Fox News, as well as their peers who had re-examined their beliefs so much that they lost their faith entirely. The skewed younger ones, many in their 30s with tattoos covering their arms, were feeling this way. And most of the leaders felt and believed, still had a strong feeling that their focus was Jesus-centered, was Christ-centered, and that people gathering together, like we've been doing this weekend, is a really good idea. But many want their churches to be affirming, meaning that they would like to perform gay weddings and include LGBTQ people in the leadership and membership, and they preferred curiosity over certainty, inclusion over exclusion. They looked to each other to ask, what could it look like to organize as post-evangelicals? And they had at least one thing in common. They were all on some journey of deconstruction, the process of re-examining their long-held beliefs, and they wanted to participate in reconstruction and building up of something new. So the next point, Amy McCall, who was once a pastor at the Chicago-based megachurch Willow Creek, is one of those leaders. And she said that her new church is called a restoration church. It's avoiding the megachurch strategies, such as taking pictures from the ceiling to count attendance. She's encouraging her congregants to reconsider God with male pronouns. And as a church, they're studying through the Bible to see what they think collectively. And the hardest part, she says, is that we were taught to take the Bible literally. We want to be a place that asks more questions than provides answers. Our job is to create the conversation. I thought that was really intriguing to me. I really loved it. So I began to think we have, as church leaders, a job to be missionaries into a different world. So Rich was pointing out that there's a kind of a paradigm shift going on. There's different values, different beliefs, and I think that we're literally dealing with a cross-cultural missionary thinking. At least we need to be. Another thing I got from this course about our culture is that our private worlds are also in crisis. Things like anxiety, loneliness, bullying, addictions, and obesity are on the rise. Life expectancy is declining. And we really have to believe and then properly communicate that the answer is God's love. The answer is life in the Spirit. The answer is the caring community of good news. So this is the posture that the church needs to take. A Spirit-led mission that's not just trying to save people from bad doctrine, but also trying to save them from the problem of their souls. For the first year of my ministry in St. Louis, I was invited to be part of the worship resource team at an evangelical church in the city of St. Louis. And I really enjoyed doing that because I didn't have to preach, and I got to just play guitar and sing and sometimes lead in the singing worship. And then something really weird happened. The pastor at the time, who was somebody I knew and liked, was doing a sermon based on Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements. Some of you are familiar with that. And he starts out his book describing the Toltec tradition about how we share this consciousness in our shared humanity. And as he was sharing, some of the board members looked a little disgruntled. And the following Sunday, the pastor of that church got up and basically renounced him and told them that he had to apologize to the congregation because it was not a Christian, quote-unquote, book. It was not a Christian-approved book. Don Miguel Ruiz, by the way, is a pronounced Christian. But I remember feeling very shocked that anybody would do that. And there was a number of people that decided to leave the church at that time. And I was among them because I did not want to be associated with the authority figure that would condemn the idea of being open-minded and looking at other inspirations. About 6 months later, the pastor that had started all that dissension called me and wanted to have coffee. So we got together, and of course we discussed what had happened in the church, and he felt very remorseful about it. He felt he had made a big mistake. And then I asked him at one point, having mentioned Swedenborg at that denomination before, why he wanted to contact me, of all people, who was just a guitar player and a singer. And he said, there was something about your singing and your sharing that was genuine. He said it didn't feel contrived, didn't feel like it was scripted. It just felt like there was a genuine soul that wanted to worship God. And I only mention that because no matter what training you have had, no matter what your scholarly title is, and there's so many here, the bottom line is people can sense your soul and your spirit. They can sense it, even if they're on a different political side or if they're on a different theological side. And I think what we bring to bear in our presentations, if you will, is a part of who we are, a part of what we believe, a part of the spirit of just enjoying each other's company and being a loving, caring community. So here's a quote from Carrie Newhoff. While clergy are identifying the need to rebuild connections between their congregation and members, as well as between members, I hear great anxiety about whether those connections frayed during the pandemic can be reestablished. The competitive advantage of the local church isn't content, it's community and connection. Every church should be running to fill that hole. I think our content is community and connection. Our theology offers relief from a traditional church dogma that puts everyone inside the denomination in good graces and everyone outside in a judgment of death. So it seems to me that the good news of the gospel is given in the inner sense of the word, which relates back to our freedom to walk in the light that we have, making sure that our listening exceeds our talking. That's all I have to share.
Thank you, Paul. All right, I'm Robin Ferryman from the Urbana, Ohio Church. And my experience of this class was a mixed bag, kind of pretty much how they all shared, because they were from real fundamental mega churches where we're not. Some of the videos that we watched I couldn't relate to because they were very different. Let's see. However, there were some things that I found useful that we were able to glean some things to use or to modify to suit our needs as well. So, and I kind of came up with more of a brainstorming kind of approach to our little thing today. So I'm going to just talk about 4 things that really resonated for me. One of them was that he talked about the church, how the church was relevant within our communities today. How are we going to be relevant? And I really like what Rich said, because we are so different, we have a unique perspective. So I put walking the walk. We should practice what we preach. We talk about being inclusive, but are we really? But at least this whole week, we've been working on that, so that's a really great thing. Let's see. So I put, ideas like we could, local activism within our own communities, public statements about who and what we represent, on our websites, our Facebook pages as a church, and open our space for other types of groups to use. We don't have to be just a church. Some of us still have buildings that are a good size that could be used for other purposes. And it brings people in. Our church, we allow 12-step groups to use our basement. So we have several 12-step meetings through the week. And we have actually had some of those people come into our church services. Probably almost half or close to half of our members are from a 12-step group or very familiar with them, and myself included, as a matter of fact. So being open to different perspectives, new ideas, approaches, fresh thinking. What could we provide that no one else provides? And I know that Rich and Paul have already spoke to that, because we are different. Let's see. And think about what are our community needs. And I got this idea from Reverend Anna Wolfenden. As she was planting the garden church, she went out to the community and looked at what their real needs were and how could, as a church, they do something about that or with that. And I think we all have that ability. And as an example for our church, it was reaching out to the 12-step groups. So everybody's different and has their own needs in their communities. Let's see. Meet people where they're at. People are hungry for real answers. They don't want to sit there and listen to a sermon where they're told what to do, and then they go away not really having gotten anything from that sermon. So they do have hard questions about the state of the world and all of its immense ugliness and beauty. And how could we address these issues in our sermons, or just the way we teach our people? Think creatively about how we might heal the church from those old images of Christ or churches. I know in our particular church, we've had quite a few people that have come from other faith traditions that were traumatized in various ways, and trying to help them redefine what God is or means in their lives and stuff has been really important and a great struggle for some of those people. This one really kind of jumped out at me. At one point, Carrie Neuenfeld had talked about updating your church. How is date your church, walk into your building or whatever space you have, and look at the hymnals, and ours are from the 1950s, for real. I mean, we are not relevant to today's generations, and just that kind of stuff it's a kind of a more of a facade kind of thing, but it really speaks because we still use those, and we have an older generation. We are not speaking to the younger crowd, as was mentioned before. We're not, and so we need to kind of look at that. Deliver what people need to hear in a way that they can hear. I put speaking the language of the natives and getting current. Actually, I have an example that just happened relatively recently in our church. We had a couple people that just popped in that weren't members, and one was a guy and one was a gal. As it turned out, the gentleman was a little MRDD, and the other woman was the staff, and it was really great. He was welcomed and all that, but as Swedenborgians, we talk up here, and we have a discussion, and I noticed that during our discussion, there was Jungian ideas being tossed out along with Swedenborg theology, and this gentleman didn't participate, and he may not have been able to participate. And I realized that we are not so inclusive as we think we are, unintentionally, but we really need to think about speaking to our members or to the community in a level or where they're at, So and I think Rich had touched on that as well in some ways. Let's see. Engage people. This was another thing, engaging people. They talked about people that are not engaged don't usually come back or don't always come back. And since the pandemic, we've lost a few people, and I thought about that. The people that we lost were not really engaged before the pandemic. The people that are still there were much more engaged. So I thought about that. And it's not that we have to guilt them into participating or doing something, but if we can encourage them to maybe do a little more or to just to participate just a little, maybe above their normal boundaries, out of their little box. Encourage but not guilt them. And they might, as they get more involved, they'll take it more, this is more personal to them and meaningful for them as well. So the next big idea was our neighbors in our community. Define who we are and how we live as a church. Everyone is our neighbor, and so I'm kind of really big on this idea of really in the mega churches or just the mainstream churches, they teach you a lot about, what you need to believe and all that stuff. But we, as our church, Love in Action, to really see the neighbor as the people we love, and that everybody is our neighbor. And I think that is something that's unique to us too. And think about ways that we could really focus on that idea to open up people's minds to see even people in other countries as their neighbor, and they deserve the honor and dignity of being loved and treated with respect. Let's see. I think we could teach that differences and diversity are beautiful, and they're not to be afraid of, or be afraid of. Let's see here. So another one, a big topic was this is another one for me, rediscovering the enchantment of the world and its connection to the spirit world. I think that because of science and our culture and through time and history, we've lost that direct communication with the world, with the planet. And for those that are environmentally conscious, that this is an area that merging science and religion, I think, is something that we can help bring together and kind of teach people that as well. Let's see. So this idea of transformation, I think people want an experience of God. I've talked to a lot of people, and there's this experiential movement going on, so people are going out into nature to have their spirituality. And there's things I've been researching, like the wild church, that touches in that area where they go out in nature and they have their divinity. Sorry, I'm blanking out here. I'm getting nervous. Okay. So I've been trying to think of just different ways that we can approach our church and religious-wise. The last thing that I want to talk about is it's the same thing, experiencing or being moved by the divine. And George Dole had talked about this in some of the classes that I took. And while I was taking my LP training, he kept emphasizing that people want an experience, and how do we lead them to that experience. And so I like that idea of the correspondences with nature, because I think that the more people can experience the divine in their personal life, I think that will help open them up more. And that is something that we also have as our faith tradition, a much more unique approach to that. That's all I have.
So one of the other ideas from the course was having the minister do a video or even a statement on the website is not very convincing to the public right now. They do not trust authority figures, and certainly the minister has an agenda. So I'm immediately suspect of what the minister is going to say about the church. Instead, let the people in the church talk about why they're coming. It's much more powerful. So to that end, we took that seriously, and we put together, I'm going to share a quick video with you, if this technology works with us.
I'm part of the Church of the Holy City, honestly, because of the community and the social impact I feel like it's having.
So can you see the pictures? No, they're not coming through. What I think what I'm going to do is just, I'm going to pay, you're going to have to listen to the sound of it maybe instead of the... Okay, let's see what happens.
The 3 reasons why.
I'm part of the Church of the Holy City, honestly, because of the community and the social impact I feel like it's having.
The 3 reasons why I decided to attend the Church of the Holy City are quite simple. One is that it's inclusive while also incorporating believing in Jesus as the Son of God. The second is that the insights of Swedenborg, I think, really bring in some additional perspectives that allow us to see into the spiritual realm and translate that to what we're seeing in the Bible. And the third thing is the discussions. I've always wanted a church that has discussions where you don't have to have all the same opinions.
I heard, Rich talk a little bit about the mission of the church and, ideas around spiritual entrepreneurship. And that was really exciting to me. And I just liked the vibe of the community. So I came back.
I'm not that worried about things like the afterlife, but I do think about how I should live my life in a way that advances humanity.
The idea that there are many spiritual paths to the realm beyond. We believe that we have found a special way, but Swedenborgianism honors the truths that are embodied in other great faiths.
Church of the Holy City is a really unique community where you can have these conversations about difficult topics like politics, like race, and still be very respectful.
The future should be about how we can connect with each other at a very deep level.
I believe that we all have a purpose to build God's kingdom on earth, whatever that looks like, whether it's in their jobs or starting something new or even caring for their families, but it's very purposeful. And so it's about bringing meaning and purpose back to church.
Our church and churches that will exist in the future will have to take on the responsibility of healing humanity, not just telling people what they should do or not do, but really evaluating trauma, listening to people, and being a space that asks, what does the church need to be, right? I think the church of the future will be a curious one.
When we make change, we do not simply throw away the old institutions, we reform them rather than discarding them. And so in that spirit, I want to see us preserve as much as we can of the values and traditions of the church and somehow repurpose them for a new setting.
I want to kind of have the space where we can talk about issues like poverty and civil rights and women's rights and creating peace.
Now it's kind of setting down some new tap roots with this generation so that those can grow in the way they need to grow into the 21st century.
Having communities that help and encourage spiritual growth for whatever way that looks like for each individual, I think is really important.
Building community and spiritual capital and understanding different points of views and not feeling like you're being required to think a certain thing to belong in the community.
I've seen members of the church really reach out, have the community change their lives in different ways, whether it's the whole organization coming together or making more interpersonal relationships.
Rather than this is just something we do where we're trying to convert people, it's more about who are we becoming and how are we becoming more like Christ and helping earth become more like heaven.
One of the things that we've done well is, using our space to facilitate, conversations, not only within our community, but with other religious groups, other non-denominational groups, and having it be a space of sharing.
Our relationships, the way that we treat each other, the continuity of our commitment to spirit is being realized and being experienced by our neighbors and by the people who come into the church for various rentals.
Our community happens to be filled with a lot of, social entrepreneurs, which correlates directly with spiritual entrepreneurship. I know that's been my life's dedication and what I think my life's purpose is.
Church of the Holy City has the potential based on what it's already done to truly be a hub of spiritual entrepreneurship in the very chaotic environment of the capital of the United States. Amid all those tensions, it can provide a sanctuary to show what is possible, in that it's grounded in true humanity, true acceptance, a true love for what you do.
Okay, thanks. So now we can go to questions. Now we can go to questions, and I'll move to the table. I'm just going to change the slide back to our wonderful team. Any questions from the audience?
You have to walk up to this microphone, please.
Hi, this is Andrew from the San Francisco Church. Is this on?
Really close. Right up to it.
Wow. Okay.
There you go.
I'm Andrew from the San Francisco Swedenborgian Church, and I'd like to ask if that video would be available. I'm Andrew from the San Francisco Church. I'd like to ask if that video could be available to us. I'd like to share it with our stewardship committee and many others.
Yes, I think we're going to put it on our website and make that our testament about who we are, instead of the minister telling you what our theology is. So
It's a great
yeah,
video.
thanks.
It covers all the topics very thoroughly, actually.
Thanks.
Great panel. Thank you very much. Can you hear me? But stay in the video. Okay. Robert Carr from San Francisco Church. Sometimes we learn from the negative. So you mentioned, Rich, at the beginning that when you all attended the evangelical workshop, there were some things that were pretty obvious that didn't fit with our church. I'm curious if you can share what several of those were.
I'll share what I think, and if you have other things. It kind of became a joke when we started our sessions with like a support group, because one of the sessions they had two different teachers, and one I found it hard to get through. I felt sometimes his language was sexist, the way he referred to women, for example. I was just like, whoa, that's a pastor. And then what was so interesting was the urgency and the success that they've had with their megachurches is based on fear. That a fear that you're going to go to hell if you don't accept Jesus Christ. And that the number one strategy they had was preach salvation through Christ. That was the number one thing. What I realized is in chaotic times that we're living in, the idea of a spiritual teacher or a political leader who says, it's not complicated, it's very simple. Follow me, follow these rules, and you'll be okay, is an extremely appealing message. And I actually predict that fundamentalism or that will grow around the world, and authoritarian politics will grow around the world as people seek I want a strong man, usually, who will just tell me what's right. So we'll see that. That's not our market, and that's not the future if our theology and predictions are correct. We have to be on the opposite side of that. But that would be, the biggest thing was just constantly saying, preach Christ as salvation. And that's it. That was it. And just some of the language was just very awkward through it. Do you remember anything else that we saw that was really different from them?
I was thinking of the whole welcome committee. So another section was on welcoming your people, which is all well and great, but they were coming from a place of mega churches. So to have people out in the parking lot directing traffic and greeting people with umbrellas, to have a committee at the door welcoming people, also get people to sign and check in before they even arrived. And it was just all that kind of stuff that was like this whole chapter was this useless to most of us, you know. And again, and what Rich had said about the wording and the focuses were much different than what we would have.
And I think the only thing I would add is that we're numbers obsessed. And I don't know that that's different than the evangelicals, but I know that that can be a distraction.
Yeah, I did a presentation with the Council of Ministers, and one thing it was about sowing seeds, and I did stress, we can sow the seeds, we can't say where they're going to go, and we have to let that go and let that go with God. Like we're so into metrics, but we don't know the lives we're influencing, so don't write off what you're doing. And that thing was very metric, very much numbers, souls saved, and so forth, which was really different. So I think those are really good examples of some of the difference. Robin has another one.
The one thing that I think we generally agreed on that was a useful idea was to get to know your electronic social media, and as we all are learning about how to do Zoom and stuff, that was a big focus, and that was a pretty useful one for us too, about reaching out to the market or to people through your social media, your Zoom and your Facebook and websites and stuff, because that is the time that we're in right now.
One final thought is if we talk about diversity, very often we don't think of evangelicals as diversity. People have pointed out in my sermons sometimes if there's a group that I give a little I'm negative toward, it can be fundamentalist. So even being in their world was a bit of understanding a different perspective with love that we often just write off as they're not like us. So that.
Rich, is it hard to get the presentation back? Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Because the list that you created of the lessons, I feel like they're really good goals, but they're actually skills that need to be acquired. Like, it's one thing to say teach this or love this or include this. It's really difficult, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so it requires, I think, really learning it, requires dedication, and also practice. And I think I can speak for potential target audience because I was unchurched for a long time because I had a really bad experience growing up in a Southern Baptist church. And the thing that made me stay away from church was the difference between stated belief and practice, like what people actually did. You know, and so I felt like everyone in church was a hypocrite because they did not do what they preached. And so, you know, with you, that's when I sort of saw, oh, okay, you actually can find people who can live what they say. And so, but living what they say is really difficult. So I just want to ask, you know, what can we do to actually really learn the skills of love and inclusion, teaching?
Yeah. Another benefit, I think, from this course, and I mentioned it about being genuine, is that we are human, and we need to also emphasize that we are learning and seeking together. And there's an old adage that teachers used to use, we have learned not to be the sage on the stage, but the guide on the side. So we're really just learning with you. Sorry.
And I'll just say that I think ministers are not being prepared for the world that we're in today, and so the trainings and so forth. But I would say that today is a good example of literally we're sharing what we learned with other people in the field. But I agree. I think really what you're trained a lot of theology in theological schools for pastoring, and you come into a situation where you're running a board, you're dealing with diverse personalities. You might have an old building, and you have to know those skills. And then it's all the spiritual skills. Like, are you an authentic person? What's your spiritual life like? We will have to reimagine, I think, even ministry for the future. So that was a good point.
Hello, Becky Moore, Michigan Association. I was intrigued by one of the things you talked about earlier, that is partnering and collaborating within the community. And I just wondered what that might look like, some things that you have done. Is it interfaith? Is it with non-faith groups? Just some ideas. Thanks.
one thing so having a little bit of a diverse congregation, right? We're small still, but we're diverse. So just a quick example is Annabelle is from was born in Korea, has Korean connections, and so she said there's this really cool monk who's he's the Dr. Phil of South Korea, and he's like really famous. He's coming to Washington to speak to Congress about South Korea. Could we host an event at the church with him that we could broadcast to South Korea? So that was a picture that you saw there, and we've done numerous events now with him. But the perfect thing was the Korean community came in, brought all the food, brought all their people, filled the space, and it was just a great event. And we're teaching, and so you saw our younger members. One was born in Iran, one was raised Jewish. They're really allergic to anything that feels non-ecumenical. So when you do something with a Buddhist leader, it has an impact beyond. We have also partnered with Rumi Forum, which is a Muslim community group, and we've done book parties, and then they bring their people. We broke the fast of Ramadan at the church with the Muslim community. They brought the group. So if they can bring the group, that has been a big help. We've done book launches, and so yeah, because it is exhausting if you think every event you've got to like get your people out. It's just like too much. So yeah, partnering with other groups, and we do a lot of that. Does anybody have an example?
When Kit was our minister, he had a workshop, and he invited an imam, a priest, and a rabbi, and the topic was the 10 Commandments, the Decalogue. So, and it was really interesting, and I thought it was a good way to open the door. At the Garden Chapel, we're starting karate lessons again in July, so I'll be teaching that, and guitar lessons as well. And we have our Beatle Festival on October 9th, which is open to the whole community. So, an hour and a half of straight Beatle music with no preaching. So, except all you need is love.
At our Urbana church, I'm going to be brainstorming for some ideas to do that. But before Urbana University closed, we always participated in the Alicia Titus 9/11 events. We would go volunteer and help out, and that was a way for us to get out into the community and join forces with the university. But we have thought about for doing outreach as a small group to maybe partner with other churches in their outreach. So we could do fundraising or whatever they're doing with other churches. And that's something that we've been talking about doing.
Yeah.
I'm going to give one shout out to Robin that I've noticed. We have the lesbian LGBT group that's worked on the resolution. It's going to continue to work together. And somebody came to her church in Urbana who is an educator, a young person who's an educator on this. Logan brought incredible liveliness to our meetings and wanted to come here and present, and was so enthusiastic that here's a church taking me seriously. But that was because they came in for something else. And so I want to shout out to you. That's a perfect example. It's just one person. They were looking for something. She embraced it, got them on this other thing. And I just thought it was that was a string that you can pull. So good job, Robin. Julie?
For those of you who don't know,
It's on. Just talk loud.
Okay, I'm going to sort of turn half and half. Yeah, I'm Julie Conneran. I'm a convention minister and an interfaith minister. I don't have a church, but I do have a church. Okay. I go to a facility to provide them every 2 weeks with something. And my way of working with them, because I thought, how am I going to work with these people? I know they were all Christian, because I asked if there were Jewish people and other things, because I wanted to make sure I covered everybody. And with the interfaith training, I was totally indoctrinated, loved them all. Buddhists, the whole 9 yards. It was fabulous. I love them all. And so I bring those ideas too. But basically, I keep asking questions. I do have a passage from the Bible, and we talk about it. And I said, what does this mean to you? My central core is the Bible is all about us. How could that be? Oh, when does that apply to us? And they get it right away. So there's a lot of discussion. I do some talking, they do a lot of talking, and they keep coming back. So the answer is, I think you have to serve people where they are. How can you help? Sometimes they ask for help. I can do that. I was a chaplain for 10 years. So to me, church is about serving people. How can you help them? Everybody has problems. Everybody has struggles. You take the Bible, and I include Swedenborg, they don't know that. How can you help people? Because everybody's struggling. So I hope that some of that can come towards church. But as I say, I go to the people, so it's a little different.
Yeah, it's necklace. Our chaplains, which we have many now in the denomination, are experts in this because they have to be on other people's agenda. Shalanda?
Follow the hybrid model. Hi, everybody. I'm Shalanda Ingram. I'm from the Church of the Holy City in D.C., and I also support the Church of the Holy City in Wilmington, too. But I wanted to just lift up what it is to be a person on the margins in this community, right? And to say that when you're dealing with diversity or navigating things, it's okay to be where you are, and it's really important that you keep it real so that you're not creating harm by saying, like Annabelle mentioned, hey, we're doing this, when really that's not in your skill set. I highly recommend language like community of practice, or hey, we're working on this, or we're listing a land acknowledgement, but we don't actually know any indigenous people, and we invite you to come, right? So that being where you are is awesome, right? And pretense can cause harm to people, right? So I just want to lift that up. And also to say that sometimes people are finding their ministry in your church, and that's what has happened for me, right? And so Reverend Rich and I have a very intense, powerful relationship that I didn't know I was developing a ministry. I thought I was doing a rental program, right? And so I just encourage folks to make room for that. People are evolving in the atmosphere with you, and that it may not be obvious to them, it may be an evolution that's happening, and just to be available for that to take place in some of these spaces and with some of the content, right? Like I came across some different books, I reach out to different members, engage with them about content. So it's not about perfection or pretending to have it all together as much as it is being available for people to evolve in your presence. So I just wanted to put that into the space.
I think that's a great point, and one of the, we do, half of our service is a liturgy. It's a short liturgy, very short for Swedenborgians, and half of it is a dialogue. And the cool thing about dialogue, particularly for a pastor, is, to Shalanda's point, I don't have all the answers. Very often, I would say, really, 9 out of 10 times, somebody said something in the dialogue, and people are like, wow, maybe now I understand the text. Or maybe now I understand what Rich was saying. So and it just also shows vulnerability that the pastor doesn't have the answers. I'm doing the best I can. We're all figuring this out. I'll try to answer your questions, and it just relieves the pressure of the pastor has all the answers, because they don't, and they never did, and they shouldn't have pretended that they did. Anything else on that? Any other questions?
Just one.
Yes.
Did you really meet the Dalai Lama?
He's confusing me with F. Bob Toffel. F. Bob Toffel met the Dalai Lama at the Cambridge Church. There's a great photograph of that. But we do look alike. We have the same last name. If you're curious how we're related, you can ask me at lunch. Any other comments or questions or anything else before we close out this session? So Shoutout was really a driving force in the group. She and I co-hosted it. And her insights are really, she was sort of the leader of the group. So it's unfortunate that she wasn't with us, but we carry her in spirit today. And she was a driving force for even creating the group. So we're thinking about her right now and hoping that everything goes well on her health front. And thank you all for coming, being so attentive. Really appreciate it. And God is calling, so we have to go.